Let's do it.
This is the SEC Insider Hit. And it's presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue.
It is good to be blue. We are the Out of Bounds Show, brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. Good morning. Welcome in. This is 105.9 The Zone ESPN. We are the Out of Bounds Show. I'm your host, Bo Bounds. And, well, some of us watched NFL exhibition football last night. I mean, is there anything better than watching Kyle Trask play QB? I don't think so. Or Joe Buck and Troy Aikman interview the Washington Commanders' new owner. Whichever way you want to go. But I tell you where we're going to go. Peter Overzet, FantasyLife.com, joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. He's a fantasy football insider and I think a Miami Dolphins fan. Peter, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good, guys. Yeah, my buddy Patrick Laird used to be on the Dolphins. He's now on the Bucks, though, so I've shifted my allegiances over to the Tampa Bay Bucks.
Okay, so you went from Miami to Tampa Bay. That didn't take much.
Well, no, it's about when your buddy plays in the NFL, that's the team you root for. So, you know, he might be buried on the running back depth chart, but my loyalty is far stronger than fantasy relevance.
Are you from South Florida? Where are you from?
No, I'm from Denver originally. I grew up a Broncos fan, but then fantasy football kind of ruined traditional fandom for me, so I don't feel anything when the Broncos do good anymore, which is a good thing because they don't do good anymore.
Yeah, but Sean Payton, what do you think? Are we looking at Sean was unbelievable at New Orleans. Obviously, that's the team in this market. We're 2.5 hours away from NOLA. You think Sean has Sean and the Broncos have a bounce back year?
I do think he's legitimately worth at least a couple of wins, not to mention an entire culture shift in there. And I think after what happened last year with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson, it was about as close to rock bottom as you can get as far as, high profile acquisitions. Everyone thought Russ was going to turn Denver around. And I think it really proved how important coaching is in this league now. And we saw it to an extent with Brian Daboll in New York last year. I mean, that wasn't a good roster, and he turned them into a legit playoff threat down the stretch. And I think Sean Payton clearly can do the same thing. And, the way I'm approaching my fantasy drafts is a bounce back for the Broncos this year. So, yeah, I think Sean Payton is going to turn things around.
Okay. Now, where do you live now?
I'm outside in New England here, just a little bit outside of Boston.
Ah, you're in Patriot land. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, not too far from Foxborough, so I get to deal with all the Patriots homers on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever bounce back. I mean, Belichick bottled it. He's the best ever. You got to tip the cap, but I just don't see what they're doing as another path with the loaded AFC, Peter. And I mean, Mac Jones is a nice player. And then Bill's kind of gone crazy pills on what he's done with his staff. I mean, do you see a path of New England coming back to some kind of big-time power again?
I mean, I feel like they need a full-on reboot. Bill Belichick does maybe have a couple years of elite coaching left. Yeah, maybe, but you're not going to get it done with a quarterback like Mac Jones. And then the other thing that you see what is the recipe for a team to succeed without, a top 10, top 15 quarterback? Something like we've seen from the Niners. It's to surround that mediocre quarterback with just incredible loaded talent. And the Patriots have done the opposite. I think you could argue they have the worst wide receiver room, even tight end room collectively in the entire league. So if you don't have a quarterback who can elevate talent, you have a coach at the twilight of his career, you finally bring in an offensive coordinator, I just don't see anything in this stew that indicates it's going to lead to success.
How many is it? All right, we're visiting with Peter Overzet, FantasyLife.com. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show. How early is too early to do your fantasy draft? Because Jason did one a week and a half ago, my producer who booked you, and I told him that it was a massive party foul and that what few dude qualities he had should be revoked. How do you see that as doing a fantasy football draft a week and a half ago?
Well, if you think that was crazy, then you probably will have your mind blown that I started doing drafts the second the Super Bowl ended. Because I do a bunch of best ball drafts, and the reason you can get away with that is because you don't have to manage the lineup. So you're able to do a ton of lineups, and I play over on Underdog Fantasy. But there's pros and cons to drafting early and late, right? The cons are obviously a guy tears his ACL, and you just drafted a guy who's not playing for the year. So, yes, that's certainly in play. The pros, though, are we see guys rocketing up draft boards. And if you're on top of your stuff and you're following the news, you can get ahead of these movements before your league mates do. If you draft, the Wednesday before the season starts, everyone's going to know James Cook is the starting running back on the Bills by now, and he's going to be going in the 5th round. But if you're drafting right now, you might be able to sneak him in the 9th round because no one is paying as close as attention as you are.
Okay. What, by the way, Peter's got a fantastic podcast, LOLs, with Brian Hooper. And somebody just asked if y'all are drinking most of the time when you're doing that podcast. Peter?
No, that show is at 1:30 Eastern on Thursday afternoons. I have a family. I have a house. I have responsibilities. I am not drinking at 1:30 on a Thursday afternoon, but I am glad I could clear that up.
Now, Peter, we are big proponents of day drinking on the Out of Bounds show.
I actually enjoy day drinking more than night drinking now too as I get older. But it's weekend day drinking. I can't be
Gotcha.
getting faded in the afternoon and then having to put my daughter down for sleep. That doesn't seem like a good recipe.
No, you're right. I'm an empty nester, so it's a different chapter, different verse, my man. Okay, so let's start with. Oh, do you bet on games on the weekend too?
Yeah, I do a little bit more recreationally. I'm not one of those hardcore sports bettors who's looking for arbitrage and shopping lines. I like doing, but I am more fantasy. Like the fantasy is what captures my attention in the off season. It's drafting teams. In season, it's playing DFS, daily fantasy. And those feel to me more like this puzzle you're putting together. You're competing against other people. There's something about the sports betting and going against the house who knows what they're doing and is always shifting the lines. It's just not as enjoyable for me.
Fair enough. All right, first question. When do you take a quarterback, Peter?
Yeah, this year is a really, really interesting dynamic for quarterback prices because for the first time, we had an era of probably about 8 to 10 years of late-round quarterback being kind of the widely accepted strategy. And basically all these guys weren't really separating from each other. You could get similar amount of points at, QB7 as you could QB20. But what's changed now is that we've had this era of the elite QBs mainly driven by their ability to rush the ball that's vaulted all of these guys up into the 2nd and 3rd round of draft. And for me this year, I have pause when I see these prices, and it's like, yes, Jalen Hurts is an awesome quarterback. He could easily finish as QB1, but you're having to pass on elite skill position players at the running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. And the kind of conclusion I've come to is there's too much opportunity cost if you're taking those guys in round 2 or 3. Now, where I think you can maybe have your cake and eat it too is waiting a few more rounds and getting a Lamar Jackson, getting a Justin Fields, getting a Justin Herbert. These guys are much cheaper, but I think could challenge those top guys to finish QB1 overall. So my thought would be, if you really want an elite quarterback, pass on the first 4 to 5 guys and then get your elite quarterback in round 4 or 5 where the opportunity cost of who you're passing on isn't as large.
Okay. Peter Overzet, fantasylife.com, LOL's podcast, among others, joining us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Is it okay to draft a wide receiver in your first 3 picks?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And this year, the landscape is really unique as far as where you pick. I do think determines kind of where the value pockets of the draft are. If you have a top 2 pick, guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, depending on your format and scoring settings, those guys have really separated. But when you come back at the end of the 2nd round, a lot of the good wide receivers are gone. And so at that point, I'm not a huge fan of reaching for guys like DK Metcalf or Calvin Ridley in the 2nd or 3rd round. So if you have an early pick, I might be like, don't force a 3 wide receiver start. Now, on the flip side, if you're on the end of the board, I think all the best picks are wide receivers. So you might be able to start Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Garrett Wilson. Then you come back at the end of the 3rd round, all the good running backs are gone, and then maybe a guy like Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen makes sense. So I think where you're picking determines which kind of positional start is optimal, but in a vacuum, starting with multiple wide receivers is very viable.
Okay, some people go with the pick, you get your pick, and you're good. But then you've got the what are they called? The bidding leagues where you get like
the auction.
Yeah, so we do an auction. And so as soon as Justin Jefferson goes up, it's an all-out madhouse. How do you handle that in the if you've only got $200, whatever it is, how do you handle that early?
Yeah, I think one thing I really like to do prep for auction drafts in that I like to look at the starting lineup and how much money I have and then actually plot out like a potential how much I'm willing to spend on my wide receiver one. And so say like Justin Jefferson's going for $55 in that sample, you might say, hey, I want a wide receiver one, but I only want to allocate $40 to it because I've done a budget essentially ahead of time saying I'm willing to do 30 for my running back one here. And then what I do is I update those dollar values as I make the picks. So then maybe all of a sudden I get Devontae Adams for 37 and I'm like, okay, I had $40 allocated for my wide receiver one. I can slide that $3 over to my RB2. So I think just kind of planning out ahead of time will keep you on schedule in the same way you would budget any expense.
Okay. So I may just have to go up to like $80 to get Jefferson.
See, I think that's too much opportunity cost, right? Because now you're talking about almost 50% of your entire budget. And if you equate it to a snake draft league, what that would be similar to.
We used to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be like spending your first and second round pick on Justin Jefferson. So now your opponents are going to get two kind of picks there early, and you're spending essentially your first two picks on one guy. And so I do think you want to think about each pick and dollar value as an equivalent pick. And if you spend 50 on a wide receiver one and then another 30, that is essentially like using your first two picks on one guy.
Okay. Peter Overzet, fantasylife.com, talking ball with us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. This is getting me fired up. Okay, what about A.J. Brown? Where do you have him ranked as far as a fantasy wide receiver?
Yeah, I think he's definitely a back end of round one, early round two pick. He's a really interesting profile in that we know the ceiling and the spike weeks are going to be massive. I mean, he would have those games where he'd have 2 touchdowns in the first half, and then they'd rest the starters and run the ball in the second. And you're like, holy cow, he could have gone for 50. So we do know he's going to be boom bust. The Eagles have a ton of weapons. You know, the running game is going to get going. Devonta Smith is a star. Dallas Goedert is still very much legitimate. And so I think as long as you're willing to embrace the volatility with AJ, he's a great pick. Now, if you say to me, Pete, I don't want to deal with taking some weeks where he only scores 5 points, then I might point you to Garrett Wilson or Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think Garrett Wilson is a guy I'm starting to get really excited about because I think he could have basically a Devontae Adams-esque season with Aaron Rodgers. He's that level of talent. He performed at such an elite level as a rookie with truly horrendous quarterback play. We're talking about Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco, and he still was highly efficient and productive. And now you're going to give him a massive quarterback upgrade. To me, he's the guy that could just really blow away his ADP. And then a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, I just know he's going to be a steady Eddie. He's going to consistently earn targets. He's going to be involved, whether they're winning, whether they're losing. And so if you're saying, hey, I don't want kind of the risk of the boom bust with A.J. Brown, then I would certainly point you in the direction of Garrett Wilson or Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay, all right. If we've got a listener that's about to draft tonight, tomorrow night, going into the weekend, give me an idea of what you like. I mean, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver. How do you see it? What would you recommend? I know there's plenty of different paths to win a champion or get in the playoffs. Everybody wants to get in the playoffs. Then you got a chance to win it usually. So how do you see it as far as the first 4 or 5 rounds?
Yeah, I think this year, I do think if you're able to get 2 top wide receivers, I think that's really my ideal start. You know, if you were able to start 2 of A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Garrett Wilson, I think you're doing really well. And the reason that is because from about the beginning of round 4 to the mid to the end of the 8th round, I consider all of those wide receivers as part of a similar tier. Like the upside you're getting, kind of the risk of the pick, they all feel similar to me. That's a 4-round spread. So I'm talking like basically when Jerry Jeudy and Keenan Allen come off the board, all the way down to guys like Gabe Davis and George Pickens and guys that have legitimate exciting upside who go 3 to 4 rounds later. So if we think about that tier, then what I'd ideally like to do, get the 2 elite wide receivers early, then come back in the 3rd and 4th round and target some of these running backs. And there's some really juicy prices for running People are worried about Zeke hurting Ramondre Stevenson's ceiling. I think it's insane because Ramondre dusted Damian Harris last year, and I'd argue Damian Harris is a far more effective back than Zeke Elliott at this point of his career. It's really changed for me on Ramondre. I know that the Jets signed Dalvin Cook. I'm still very excited about Breece Hall's late season upside. There's people who are worried about Tank Bigsby for Travis Etienne. I think he still has a chance to put up a 1,500-yard season. So I look at some of these running back profiles available in the 3rd and 4th, and to me it looks perfect to be like, I'll start with 2 wide receivers, I'll grab some of this running back value, 3rd and 4th, and then I'll come back and hammer some of these high upside wide receivers in 5, 6, 7. I love guys like JSN, the rookie on the Seahawks. I mentioned George Pickens. There's a lot of exciting profiles here. Jahan Dotson, who's 2 rounds cheaper than his teammate Terry McLaurin, and I think could have a breakout year. So I think if you can kind of zig and zag through the pockets of the draft, but really focus on running back and wide receiver through the first 6 or 7 rounds, you're going to be in
All right, Peter Overzet, fantasylife.com on the Out of Bounds show. Fantasy football, baby. Jason did his draft a week and a half ago. Massive, party foul for the show, but that's okay. We did our rookie draft on Sunday, Peter. Have you heard of that? Our commissioner, so he threw it on us late because he wanted to get an edge, and we did we all drafted 4 rookies on Sunday, but our real deal is on Monday of Labor Day.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I play in some leagues like that too. We just had a rookie draft. I liked it. I just love drafting, and so I'm not going to turn down drafting whenever. But I do think, going back to that point, it's like the rookies too. I think a lot of the preseason usage really tells us a lot about how these teams are feeling about them and maybe how they want to utilize them. And I think especially some of the top end guys like Bijan and JSN, everything we see is pointing to these guys having massive first years. So I think you need to embrace the early drafting. Get an edge on your league mates who aren't paying as close attention.
Okay. Who's your biggest dark horse of this year's draft?
For a player or team?
Player.
Well, my highest drafted guy across all my drafts is JSN right now and James Cook. Those are 2 guys I mentioned. But let me go a little further down and do a deep sleeper, and let's bring it back to the Sean Payton conversation. They went up and they traded to get Marvin Mims, rookie wide receiver, and he now has a very clear depth chart to playing time. Tim Patrick sadly done for the year. It seems like Greg Dulcich, the other tight end that people liked, is kind of in a tight end committee with Adam Troutman. And again, what's another pattern of this? Sean Payton brings Adam Troutman over from the Saints. He likes his guys. He inherited Dulcich. He brings over Troutman. Well, he went up and drafted Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims is Sean Payton's guy. Now all of a sudden he's going to be on the field in 3 wide receiver sets with Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. And I think people are selling him short if they just think of him as kind of a deep ball wide receiver. I think he could be used all over the formation, kind of similar to how Chris Olave was used as a rookie last year, where he could get loose deep but also used in the intermediary. I think Marvin Mims is really going to surprise people this year.
How many fantasy football teams do you manage?
So this is the beauty, right? Like, I've drafted literally hundreds of teams. I've probably drafted 400 teams, but those are best ball leagues that I don't have to manage. But the teams I actually manage, I probably have 10 to 15, but I lean way more toward best ball because I do not have time to manage that many teams.
Okay, so what does Sunday morning look like? Are you doing this is the teams that you actually have to enter the lineups, do you do that on Saturday, or what does Sunday morning look like for you?
Yeah, normally there's a waiver run in my high stakes leagues that happens on Saturday night into Saturday or Sunday morning. So you do want to get those waiver pickups in ahead of time, and you're watching the injury news, who's out, is there a backup running back you need to pick up, stuff like that. And then, yeah, Sunday morning for me, you know, waiting for an active, that's really when you know how you can set your lineup, because at 11:30 Eastern time, those 1 p.m. inactives come in, and then you start to feel good about your guys. But then otherwise, yeah, I write the Fantasy Life newsletter. I do a couple of DFS shows on my YouTube channel, getting people ready for the slate if they're building lineups for just that week. I set all my own personal lineups, maybe get a few prop bets in, and then we settle in for Red Zone.
Incredible. Oh, I love the Red Zone. So that's where you land most of the day?
That's where I land, and it was actually a thrill, because the other day I got to do a show with Scott Hansen, of course, NFL Network's Red Zone host, and that was a dream to get to do a show with him. It was a total blast. That's
cool. So Fantasy Life is really taking off, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Fantasy Life is doing awesome. We just announced a $2 million funding round that includes players like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. It includes LeBron James' family office with Maverick Carter. So, yeah, we're making some waves over at Fantasy Life.
That's awesome. Peter, I'd love to do this again in a few weeks. We appreciate your time. Congratulations on your success, and take care, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Peter Overzet, LOL's podcast, fantasylife.com, among other. He's all over YouTube. And we already had several listeners talk about how they knew who Peter was. And this guy's a crazy man when it comes to fantasy football. How about that? 400 drafts. You guys have been slacking, hadn't you, this summer? Huh? Yeah? You thought you were on draft 2 and you were paying the price. And then Peter just puts you in your place.
Incredible.
Everybody just turn around and go home. Call your boss. Tell him you got fantasy prep for the rest of the day. All right? And then you'll be ready, hopefully, by, 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon to really have your mind right. Is that fair enough?
Dude, 400 drafts. You got to know something if you've seen that many names that many times.
It reminded me of when I asked Jackson Meadows, who was my producer for a while. I said, how many bets have you placed in the last 5 days? And he thought about it for a second. And it was like this, when you see cartoons and the little thing pop up over their head and they're thinking, it's like a cloud.
Yeah, or like the gears turning.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
And he went, 300? And I went,
oh,
that could be a problem.
Dude,
I said, you've made 300 transactions in the last 5 days? He went, well, yeah, I'm betting on women's tennis in the Philippines. I went, all right, it's time to cut the cord.
That's an issue.
Yeah. And that was, I just saw his little mind working. About 300. Women's tennis, pro women's tennis in the Philippines. It takes, Jackson and Victor Conti could have been good buddies. And, Jackson could have been Johnny Manziel's running mate.
Oh, that kind of personality?
That kind of, he likes to party and that kind of personality.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got you. Yeah, I could see that. Like his best friend style, the guy that was like his quote unquote manager.
Nick?
Yeah.
I think.
I think that was his name.
I don't believe this, Mr. DX. Let's see. I'm on my 500th best ball draft. I don't believe that. Action Jackson. That's right. Double down.
Somebody on the text line says that Jackson still owes the money.
What would he owe them? I don't even want to go there, actually. I just thought about that. I started to ask, and I thought, that's not something that I want to know. So, and it's not my deal. I have enough going on. All right. The Out of Bounds Show. 105.9 The Zone ESPN. Mike Detillier will join us at 8:30. The show is brought to you by Sound and Communications. Top quality audio visual. They provide leading edge audio visual for churches, businesses, sports facilities. SoundcomAV.com. That's SoundcomAV.com. Sound and Communications. Located in Pearl, right around RPT Commercial and Miskelly Furniture. Powered by Sound and Communications.